This is Roy Gordon, a British scientist working in America's aerospace industry in California. He emigrated from Britain in 1967, just one of thousands of young scientists looking for wider opportunities and higher salaries who joined the so-called brain drain from Europe to the United States. The firm Roy came to work for has paid his own and his family's airfares, all their removal expenses, and provided them with free accommodation until they could get a house of their own. And this is Ken Carline, another British scientist who used to be a chief designer with the British Aircraft Corporation before coming to the States. Today he says he has a pretty good job. As manager of an advanced concepts team with Convair, he's worked on many of America's most advanced aircraft, and he believes he's received a higher degree of recognition, both in salary and status, from his present employers than ever he got in Britain. But for Ken and Roy, the good times may be coming to an end, for the cutback in the aerospace program has meant fewer jobs and increasing redundancies among America's immigrant scientists. Bob Hargreaves reports.
The so-called brain drain reached its peak in 1967 when both Ken Carline and Roy Gordon came to live in California. In that year alone, 6,200 scientists and engineers left Britain to work abroad, most of them in the United States, where the aerospace and engineering industries were booming. But by last year, the boom was over, and only 900 scientists and engineers came here from Britain. This year, the brain drain appears to have reversed itself. The main reason is economic. Many factories are closing down, and jobs are dwindling fast. Ken Carline, who's earning around £12,000 a year, hopes he can hold on, though he's sure that sooner or later, he'll be back in England. You're obviously a very happy immigrant here. How much would it take to entice you home again? Have you ever thought of going back to England?
Yes, of course. I'm always thinking about going back because of my family there. My daughter and my son live there. Of course, they're grown up, and one's married, and the other's getting married in February. And of course, I've thought many times about going back, but it would take quite a job to entice me. After all, I get nearly 4 times as much money here as I did in England, and that's not to be sneezed at.
If you did go back, what would you miss most about California?
Well, of course, I'd miss the weather tremendously here. The weather is fantastic, particularly in San Diego, and I think I'd miss the beach, of course. I lived in the middle of England, I couldn't be any farther from the ocean, and here I'm only minutes away from the ocean, but I miss... There's very little, really, that one misses here.
What about professionally? What's the main difference, have you found?
Well, the main difference I see here, professionally, is that people are, I think, more thought of here, particularly with talent. Particularly the Englishman, he's more thought of here than probably anyone. He's held in the highest regard.
And what do you miss most of living here about England?
Sausages.
Roy Gordon is also happy in California, but he's already lost 2 jobs out here because of the recession and is now in danger of losing the 3rd. Family ties pull hard too, and Roy and his wife have now decided to leave California for England.
Why, when you enjoy living in California so much, are you now thinking of going back home to England?
Sometimes I ask myself the same question. I think part of the answer is that I really am beginning to feel a bit homesick. I feel that my parents should have some time with the children, especially now we've adopted a young baby. She's 2 months old now. My parents, of course, have never seen her. And also, I'm trying to look towards the long term now. There is no future for a long-term future for an engineer over here in our industry. And the present state of the industry influences my decision as well, because there is a lot of unemployment at the moment. If I do lose my job, then it's going to be extremely hard to find another job. It seems strange to say it, but I really do feel I've learned a whole lot of new things over here and new ways, and I feel I can be useful back in England. That there's so much of the industry back in England that is really superior to here, but there's so much that's way behind, and some of these things seem quite unnecessary. And so I hope that I can do a similar kind of job back in England. Now that the British government is starting to put up a few new satellites, which the kind of field I've been working in, I hope to get back into that.
How would going home affect you professionally, first of all, and then personally?
Professionally, it's very hard to say. One of my reservations about going home is that I've seen before British engineers who've been in the States going home again and had the kind of whiz-kid reaction. You know, we don't need any of your American know-how around here. We can manage quite well by ourselves, thank you, which I'm a bit worried about. But I hope that since this area particularly is the kind of peak of the world's electronics industry, that it would enhance my reputation, and that I could go back to a good job, and I really do feel I have something to offer. There's a lot of things I've got used to. I mean, one thing is my beard, for instance.
Like winter?
Like winter, that's one thing I've forgotten about. I mean, it's raining outside, as you know, at the moment, but it doesn't rain very much. It never snows around here. It's usually warm. I can go to work dressed as I am and behave the way I want to. I can wear a beard at work, and my hair was considerably longer till yesterday when I had it cut. And I'm not sure whether I can do that back in England. I just really don't remember. I do remember when I was back there that I was expected to wear a shirt and tie, which is something I haven't done for about 2 years. And I don't remember many bearded engineers back there. And personally, we're very involved over here. It's a very involved country, and it's a very involved state. And we've been fairly active in the peace movement. We've been working for candidates in the election. We're into all kinds of ecology groups, and we're just into so many different activities. That we never dreamt of in England. But what I do hope is I can take this back with us, that I won't have to go back to England and behave the way I was before. I can really take this new kind of life for me back to England.
What do you think you'll miss the most about California if you do go home, when you do go home?
Oh, I'm undoubtedly the kind of standard of living that we live at. I mean, by American standards, we're probably a very low standard of living, but by our standards, even after 3 years, we can't get used to the fact that we can sit at home in the evening, and if we don't feel like cooking, we can go out to a restaurant, which was financially just impossible back in England. And also the good weather, so that you don't have to plan your summer weekend for the last week in August or last week in July and first in August. We can have our summer vacation in February or October or any time we want to. And be virtually guaranteed good weather. And just the general ease of life, the fact that everything is so casual, there's so much outdoor life.
What about Mrs. Gordon? What sort of part have you played in the family decision to maybe go back?
Fairly strong, I think. My reasons are pretty much the same as Roy's. Firstly, our parents. We've got their grandchildren here. They haven't seen them for 3 years. Gary was 6 weeks old when I came over here, and of course they haven't seen Kerry. And the schooling. I was a teacher back in England, and from what I've seen of American education, I like the way I did it personally back in England more. And I can't help looking into the future when my children are going to be old enough to be drafted. It seems to be a big cloud, as far as I'm concerned. They have a very uncertain future here in this country. I hope it's not that uncertain in England.
Statistically, the brain drain is reversing itself. But looked at individually, their reasons for leaving are usually as complex and diverse as the reasons that brought them here in the first place.
One country which isn't often in the headlines these days is the Yemen, tucked away in the southwest corner of the Arabian Peninsula. In the past, international attention was drawn to the Yemen mainly by the civil war, which had divided the country into royalists and republicans ever since the fall of the Imam back in 1962. But the war ended last March, and since then observers of the Arab world have been more concerned with events at the other end of the Red Sea. In fact, the Yemen presents an interesting contrast to the countries at the heart of the Arab-Israeli conflict. These, for example, are Yemeni Jews, Jews who live and work peacefully in the midst of a Muslim nation. Ethnically, the Jews are practically indistinguishable from the Yemenis, who are also a Semitic people, but Jews are easily recognized by their long ringlets. These people are not newcomers to the Yemen. There were Jews here 1,000 years before Christ was born in Palestine. Colonies of Jewish shipbuilders were sent by King Solomon to the then ruler of the Yemen, the Queen of Saba, better known perhaps as the Queen of Sheba. 3,000 years later, their descendants still speak a unique and archaic form of Hebrew, passing on from father to son a set of scriptures which are in themselves archaeological curiosities. Up to 20 years ago, there were something like 50,000 Jews in the Yemen out of a total population of around 4 million. And then in 1948, most of them left for Israel. In fact, it was believed for a time that all of them had left, but some of those who wished to stay behind were allowed to do so by certain mountain tribes in defiance of the Imam's orders. Sheer physical isolation is probably the most important fact of life in mountains such as these. It breeds an independence of spirit and a warm sense of hospitality. Both have worked in the Jews' favor. The present Jewish population of the Yemen is around 3,000, scattered throughout the mountains. Most of them come under the official care of this rabbi. The Jews have carefully preserved the way of life and the trades of their ancestors. They're carpenters, goldsmiths, wood carvers and leather workers. Their trades, like their beliefs, are handed down from father to son. Like Jews everywhere, they've become an important part of the economy, and in a backward area like this, their industry and business acumen are especially valuable. This Yemeni peasant travelled all day on foot in order to sell his goat skins to the tanner and coat maker. If the Jew departed, the Yemeni would have no one to sell his skins to, and the tribe's precarious economy would be thrown off balance. If the tribe gains benefit from the Jews gain benefit from the tribe, and the Yemenis themselves know this. We spoke to some of the local sheikhs who told us they're happy here. They're never out of work and have complete freedom to follow their own trade. On top of that, they earn a good living here. Very good. The Jews themselves were mistrustful of us at first. When this old man saw us, he immediately went to the tribesmen to ask their protection against us. Most of them believed we'd come to check on the Jews before sending them out of the country. All of them were horrified at the idea. Jewish womenfolk are recognizable by their silver-fringed hood. They get on well with the Arab women and perform the same tasks of water carrying and threshing. Jewish children, too, are completely integrated into the life of the village. Even so, the Jews remain a separate community, deprived of the right of ownership of either houses or land. After 3,000 years, they're still only guests. In this world of warrior tribesmen, only the Jews don't have arms. We'd be ashamed of not carrying arms, say the Yemenis. How else could we protect these people, the Jews? They're our guests. This Jewish child does have a first name, but the Yemenis don't use it. They simply call him Jew. For the Yemenis, to be a man without arms is to be incomplete. In their eyes, no one is really a man unless he carries a weapon. This Jewish family refused to be filmed. They were afraid that if they spoke to foreigners, they'd be beaten up. Our team had no way of knowing if their fears were justified. What was clear was that the relationship between the Yemeni tribesmen and the Jews was a complicated, shifting affair, sometimes seemingly open and trusting, at other times suspicious and uneasy. In spite of the Jews' anxiety, the sheikhs assured us that the community had nothing to fear. Admittedly, they were not allowed to own property, but they did have complete freedom of movement. The tribe defended them and would continue to defend them with whatever means necessary. For 3,000 years, these Jews have retained their identity in the midst of an alien culture. It is, in its way, a remarkable feat of cultural self-preservation, but how much longer can it last? Up till now, strict adherence to the rituals of the past has been enough to keep this tiny community alive. This manuscript alone has been copied and recopied by succeeding generations for over 1,000 years. But in the modern world, it's becoming more and more difficult for any society, however small, to keep its sights fixed exclusively on the past. The Jewish community in the Yemen is now faced with threats to its existence from several quarters. Further development in the Arab-Israeli conflict, for example, could well alter the protective attitude of the tribesmen. The Yemen itself is changing and is likely to change even more rapidly now that the civil war has ended. On top of all this comes the curious fact that the community is now producing many boys but few girls. Fate, too, it would appear, is taking a hand.